He is a graduate of cohort 10. So we thought it would be a good idea if he were to come back and share some of the things that he discovered to be best practices for navigating through the Capstone process and his current position at Iron Galaxy Orlando. So without further ado, I give you Matt Immerman.
So, as Courtney said, I'm Matt Immerman. Currently, I'm a producer at Iron Galaxy, where my responsibilities day by day vary, but I oversee all of our extra content for Killer Instinct, as well as the environment and UI development for Killer Instinct. I also work on Scribblenauts and an unannounced project that I can't go into too much detail on. So the main focus of the talk isn't really about what I do at Iron Galaxy, but I will have time for questions at the end. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today, which is why I'm here, is things that I learned through the Capstone process that have also helped me today while working at Iron Galaxy in industry. So I remember distinctly at this point in time in our Capstone process, a lot of us were running around kind of questioning what we were supposed to really be doing, how things were supposed to be organized, and we just had a lot of questions and didn't feel like we had a lot of answers from people who had been through the process. So I mainly wanted to come here today and talk about that. So today's topics are going to include what I call weeklies and what I call the FIEA brain trust, the difference and benefits of communication and candor, team culture, and some notes on leadership. So I'll start off with weeklies. This is a term taken mainly from film. So I was a film undergrad, and in film you have things called dailies, where the whole team gathers together and looks over the film shot by shot, and then they critique it. So we started doing something. We had Tom as our faculty advocate on focal length, and focal length found itself kind of in a rut in its production cycle. So Tom had started with us a weekly meeting where we would sit down and review the game as a team. We would play through what our presentation would be, and we would all call out things that we saw that we didn't like or things that could be made better to help push the game forward. So obviously in FIEA, because of the way that time is pressed, you don't have time to do this daily. So it helps to do this once a week. So the way we had set it up was our presentations were on Thursdays, so we would have the deadline for our team as at Monday night, which is any features we wanted for that particular showing had to be done by Monday. If it wasn't done by Monday, we weren't going to show it on Thursday. And then we would all go through it on Monday, and we'd spend Tuesday and Wednesday kind of addressing everybody's critiques and following it up. So the thing that this does is it provides the team with the ability to engage in the detailed analysis of the game as it stands, and it allows everybody in the room to be very candid and open, which was something that, again, I felt our team was particularly lacking, that this process helped us a lot with. So it was nice to have the faculty advisor overseeing it, and this year I know that Tom had mentioned that with the teams he's advising, they're starting that process earlier, and if Tom is not your advisor, I highly recommend just setting something like this up with your team. And in the beginning, it's going to be rough because people aren't going to want to be that critical of everybody else's work. It's like that's a natural thing, is everybody wants to just be like, oh, that's a good job. And then people later will say, oh, I'll just go back and fix that because I didn't really like the way it looked. But the goal should be to have everything look the way you want it to look for that presentation. Another note, what's more important about these weeklies is not so much what they're accomplishing as opposed to how they're accomplishing. So I mentioned candor, and that's going to be like a big topic throughout this presentation, is that the difference between communication and candor is communication is you going by someone's desk and saying, them showing you something they're working on and saying, what do you think of this? And naturally, your instinct is not to be like, well, here's ways you can make it better. It's to say, oh, that's an awesome job, keep up the good work. But that is not going to push your game to be the best game that it can be. And in Iron Galaxy, we're really good. From my experience, we're really good about having very candid conversations about things, and nobody feels like they're being stepped on. It's just, hey, this is good, but here's ways to make it better, and why don't we strive to achieve that? So it's important to note that it's the lead's job to really set the tone for those meetings and make it feel like it is a safe place for people to be candid and not worry about retaliation from teammates or people getting their feelings hurt. And really, you just have to check your ego at the door and be okay with showing incomplete work to your team. I know that's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around, that everybody talks about here is checking your ego and being okay with incomplete work being shown, but really that's kind of about what is at the heart of all of game development, is your work's not complete until it ships, and even when it ships, it's really not as complete as you'd like it to be anyways. So your work is always technically going to be complete. So the potential roadblocks in this system that to keep an eye out for is that, again, everybody's always afraid of saying something dumb to the team, and that feeling is going to linger around for a while in the beginning until you all get comfortable with each other. And the first few times you have it, you're going to want to be polite, you're not going to want to embarrass yourself, and you're always going to question whether what you're about to say is a good or bad idea. You're not really thinking about candor or being candid, you're thinking about not looking like an idiot, essentially. But that was kind of the benefit of having your faculty advisor in there, is they are the ones that really make sure that you guys aren't treating each other in the way that you shouldn't, but at a certain point you guys need to be able to self-monitor. So the next thing is the FIEA brain trust, which is what I used to call it. I'm a big Disney Pixar fan, and Pixar, for those of you that don't know, have what they call their brain trust, which is comprised of like John Lasseter and Brad Bird and Andrew Stanton and all their big story guys, their directors. So the purpose of what the brain trust does at Pixar, which I'm going to just quote Ed Catmull because I believe he says it best, is it puts people who take on, or the problem it looks to solve is people who take on complicated creative projects become lost at some point in the process. It's the nature of things. In order to create, you must internalize and almost become the project for a while, and that near fusing with your project is an essential part of its emergence. But it is also confusing. When once a movie's director-writer had perspective, he or she loses it. Where once he or she could see a forest, now there are only trees. The details converge to obscure the whole, and it makes it difficult to move forward substantially in any one direction. The experience can be overwhelming. So what they did was they set together all these guys, and their job was to review the work of others. So that's essentially what your capstone updates are, right? It's the whole faculty comes in here, a bunch of people with way more experience in game development than anybody else has, and their job is to nitpick at the game. And again, this is just another form of a weekly, but this time with the faculty. So what they do is they watch your presentation, and later on in the process, they'll start playing your games on a weekly basis. And they're going to discuss with you and with each other what's not really ringing true, what could be better, what's working, what's not working. But they're not necessarily going to tell you how to fix the problem, which is a good thing. I know that, again, from my experience with my cohort, there were a lot of people who left those meetings upset that the faculty would point out things wrong, but not really point out a direction on how to fix it. But that's not what they're there to do, because it's your game that you're ultimately making. You're not making the faculty's game. So they're going to question you too for the project leads in here, or the designers, or anybody who's standing up here on a weekly basis. They're going to question you about things, not because they want to make you look bad, but they really want to make sure that you thought through everything that you are about to do and about to set your team through, to test really the weak points of your game and make suggestions so you guys can settle on a path to move forward with on your game. The reason it works so well, in my opinion, is because the meetings are not like do this or else. Please don't go into those meetings thinking like, oh, the faculty said we have to do this, or we have to, it's like, again, they're just giving you suggestions. As a team, it is your decision on how you want to approach the notes that are given every week. With that being said, please make sure you have someone on your team taking notes of what the faculty's comments are, because you're not going to remember everything they say, and there's going to be a couple of things that you guys hold on to that probably aren't the most important things. So again, you have to balance the amount of work that's going to go into certain things versus the reward you will get out of it. So it really helps to have those notes written down. It's also important to note that you guys are not your ideas, so please keep that in the back of your mind, because again, if you identify too closely with your ideas, you're going to get really offended when they're challenged by people on your team or by the faculty, and you guys are way more than just the ideas you throw out there. To set up a healthy feedback system for this, the potential roadblocks that you face is is, again, the whole ego problem is a big one. And that always is just going to be something that lingers around because everybody here wants to prove themselves, and that's a natural thing. But I think it's more important to learn how to function in a team environment than to prove that you're the best at what you're doing. So setting up the healthy feedback system is important, and my biggest piece of advice for that is remove your power dynamics from that equation. At the end of the day, like, titles really don't matter. It's about working as a team towards that common goal. So the lead's job is not to dictate to the team. The lead's job is to make sure that everybody is moving forward on a straight, cohesive path and not being pulled in all different directions. And it's also important to note that you need to make sure you're focusing on the problem at hand, not the person. So if the problem is that something's not getting done, don't focus on the person who's not getting it done. Just look to solve the problem. So now onto communication and candor. I have some do's and don'ts, just again based off things that I've learned and my experience at Iron Galaxy. So the first thing that I want to propose is, what is the nature of honesty? Everybody agrees that being honest is important, but everybody seems to find it very hard to be frank, which I've noticed in the industry and here. It's a lot better once you go out into the working world because you're surrounded by people who have been doing it long enough that they don't have those qualms of looking stupid. So everybody ends up thinking about how your own failures and your own fears. Is there a way to make your leads more comfortable with an unexpected result that you guys maybe weren't expecting for the Capstone update? And how can you address the imperative many managers feel to be over-controlling throughout this whole process? Which, again, keep in mind that most people are doing this for the first time. People have not led a team of this size. People don't really know, so they're learning like you are, so it's important to be honest and open with them. So my advice is to replace the word honesty again with a word that has similar meaning but fewer connotations, which is candor. Candor is forthrightness and frankness, and it communicates truth-telling with a lack of reserve, but does not mean that you're going around kind of being an ass to everybody. You are just being constructive criticism is essentially what you're providing to everyone. So don't mistake communication for candor. So when it comes to interacting with other people in a work environment, there's times you're going to choose to not say what you're really thinking, and sometimes that can be a good thing, and sometimes that can be a bad thing. In most cases, you're just going to want to say what you're thinking, because otherwise that will end up kind of just festering and then boiling over into some meeting, and you just end up having problems in the long term that really didn't need to exist. And you really don't want to be working on a team or in a company for that matter where there's more honesty happening in the hallways than there are in your meeting rooms. That's just going to spell trouble for you because eventually that stuff finds its way back to the people you're talking about, and it just leads to unnecessary drama and distraction from what the goal should be. Do remember that there will always be some fear of being critical in an overt manner. Again, a successful feedback system is built on empathy and the idea that you're all in it together. So don't lose sight of that idea. It's very easy to think that some people are trying to sidetrack the game or derail it, but the real key there is that it's not your game, it is the team's game, and everybody's goal at the end of the day should be to make the best game possible. So don't expect candor to happen overnight. Again, it takes a while for any group to develop the level of trust necessary to be truly candid with one another, to express reservations and criticisms without fear of reprisal, and to learn the language of good notes, which I'll go into a little bit more detail later on what a good note is. But again, this is something that takes a lot of time, and I know you guys have been working with each other for the past 4 months, but some of you may not have been paired on an RPP team, and this has more of that sense of a hierarchy than RPPs did, where people do have titles, but don't let that get in the way of being candid with one another. So another big one is make sure you're seeking out people who are willing to level with you. This goes for leads, anybody on the team really, but create an environment where it's understood that everyone shows incomplete work and everyone's free to make suggestions for the game or to the team. Just because you're the lead designer does not mean that you are the only one that gets to come up with design decisions for your game. Same thing with if you're like the programming lead, you don't ultimately get to veto someone's idea. It's something that the team should be able to discuss. and work towards together. When you guys realize that that's how it really should work, and you set up this system of support with one another, the feeling of embarrassment goes away, and it allows you to speak more openly with one another, which creates an environment where you guys can all learn from one another. Don't confuse your communication structure with your organizational structure. So this is a big one that a lot of people fall into traps with, and I learned in a big way working at Iron Galaxy that this is something you should really try to avoid. So if you guys are experiencing a problem on your team, you shouldn't feel like, oh, well, I can't do anything. I have to talk to my lead first, and then they'll talk to the other leads, and then we'll figure out how we want to approach this. Everybody here is more than capable to solve problems that are popping up on a day-to-day basis. And essentially doing this just gets in the way of making any kind of progress in your game. So anybody should be allowed to talk to anyone, and anybody should feel free to solve any problems that are popping up. So do allow the communication to happen out of order, and it needs to happen without people getting bent out of shape over it. So if you're a lead, or if you're overseeing, if you're not a lead and you're overseeing just a certain element of the game, don't get bent out of shape if it's like, oh, this person talked to this other person and got an answer on what they needed. It's like, if they're talking to someone who knows more about concepting than you do, that's the person they should be talking to realistically. People talking directly to one another, then letting leads find out later is way more efficient than trying to make sure everything happens in the right order and through the proper channels. Don't view feedback as competitive. The competitive approach to feedback measures other ideas against your own, which then instead turns the discussion into a debate that needs to be won or lost. Any kind of feedback should not be viewed as something that I'm going to win my point or I'm going to lose my point of view, because ultimately it's supposed to just be a discussion, not a debate. So you should view the feedback as additive. In the additive approach, it should be understood that each participant contributes something, even if it's only an idea that fuels discussion and ultimately doesn't work out. And you guys are in that point now where you're in pre-production, where every discussion should be explored, nothing should be shot down, and you really shouldn't be committing to every idea or to no ideas at this point. You should be testing the waters to see what makes most sense for the games that you guys are making. So, good notes. A good note will always say what is wrong, what's missing, what isn't clear, and what makes no sense. A good note is always offered at a timely moment and not too late to fix the problem. I learned this kind of in a harder way while at work actually a few weeks ago, where I realized that there was an issue with timing on something later than I should have. And at that point, the solution was to then go to Microsoft, who is our partner on Killer Instinct, and explain to them what the issue was and let them decide how they wanted to proceed. But because I waited too long to inform the people that I should have, we had to then get the parent company involved, which you normally want to avoid things like that. A good note doesn't make demands. It doesn't necessarily even have to include a fix to whatever the problem is that you see. But if it is, the fix should be offered to illustrate a potential solution, not to illustrate the solution. So if you see something that you don't like, your goal should always be to offer ways to say, oh, maybe this would work or maybe this would work. But don't say, this is how it's going to work, and then get upset if people don't take that particular route. Because again, not everybody knows everything about every facet of game design. And most of all, a good note is specific. Like saying that you're writhing with boredom from whatever's being presented is not a good note. That is just a statement that nobody really has time for nor cares towards it. All right, so team culture. One of the big things is trust the people on your team, not necessarily the process you put forward. So for those of you that are like very organizationally minded, like I am, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around this, but you can't really rely on the process you're setting forward unless the team feels vested in the project you're working on already. The process exists to facilitate the work that your team is doing, and it can't tell good work from bad work, and it can't tell you what works and what doesn't work. The process is really centered around the people on your team, and it's important to remember that. Embrace failure and don't vilify it. So Andrew Stanton, another Pixar guy, says one of his big things is to fail often and fail early. There's always time to course correct, but if you're living in this fear of not moving or not making mistakes, then you're not really moving things forward. So if you're not experiencing failure, then you're making a far worse mistake. You're being driven by the desire to avoid it, and the desire to avoid failure by outthinking it ultimately leads you to failure anyways. So again, another Andrew Stanton quote, which I really enjoyed and which I actually had up in the room for our team, was that moving things forward allows the team you're leading to feel like, oh, I'm on a boat that's actually going forward towards land, as opposed to having a leader who says, I'm still not sure, I'm going to look at the map a little bit more, and we're just going to float out here, and I want all of you to just kind of stop rowing until we figure this out. And then weeks are going to go by, morale's going to plummet, and then failure is going to become self-fulfilling. So just pick a direction and go in it, and if it's not working out, again, be very honest with the team, be honest with the faculty, don't hide things from them. That's another thing, is that a lot of people seem to want to make things look better in their presentations than they may really be, but that defeats the purpose of having your updates. The purpose is to tell them of the problem so they can help prescribe solutions or different ways of thinking about things. Trust in others. So that's another big one, is you're not on a one-man team or a five-man team. Your teams are comprised of many people from many different backgrounds, and you should trust them to get their work done and solve their problems. That doesn't mean that they don't need oversight, but it does mean that you should trust them and that you can all come together to untangle the cause of a problem, so that you can avoid similar things moving forward. If on your team, if you find yourself asking the question, when something breaks, whose fault is this? You're vilifying failure instead of accepting it. So your goal is to avoid something like that. So instead of asking whose fault is it that something broke, it should be, well, why did this happen and how can we avoid this moving forward? Not finding the person who did it and kind of making them feel bad for it, because people are already going to feel bad when their stuff doesn't work or their stuff breaks. It's important to note that there's plenty of things to be afraid of in the Capstone process. Again, this is the first time of making a game of this scale, and you and your teammates really need to just come together and trust one another in order to see the process through to the end. It will save you a lot of headaches if you learn this early on as opposed to later, because later on, you might cause some unnecessary drama by going over people's heads and not really trusting their abilities. Anyone should be able to fix problems. Again, trusting your teammates doesn't mean they won't make mistakes or that you won't make mistakes. It just means that if you do or they do, that you guys will all be there to help each other solve the problem at hand. And finding and fixing problems is the responsibility of every member of your team. Everyone should feel free and motivated to attempt to solve whatever problems you guys are facing. So when a random problem pops up, it shouldn't cause a panic on the team. Someone should just be able to say, oh, I know how to fix that, and just go ahead and fix it. Individuals respond with their best thinking when they're not frozen, sitting there just waiting for approval on how to move forward with something. If you do this on your capstone, or especially out in the industry when you have way more people on your teams, you're going to have people sitting there on a daily basis with nothing to do until the lead specifically says, okay, now here's the problem you're going to fix and here's how you're going to fix it. Just trust in them to fix the problem the right way. That, again, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some oversight after the fact, but you should not have them sitting there waiting until you have time to get to that problem and help them out with it. And then, again, keep your ego in check, big recurring thing. Despite what you may think at times, everybody on your team is going to want to make a great game. The need to stroke one's ego to get the credit that you feel you deserve or whatever it may be, you should strive to check those impulses at the door, and the credit should always go to the team. Again, making a game is a team process, not an individual process. So going up there and saying, oh, this was my idea, and it's so great, all that really does is it's like, yes, you may feel awesome because you're getting credit, but it makes the rest of the team kind of feel like they're not necessary in the whole process that you guys are going through. So some notes on leadership. Loosen your grip, don't tighten it. I know this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but when control is the goal, it's going to negatively impact your culture. So an example is, don't view not being invited to a meeting as a threat to you on the project, because some people on your project are going to know more about certain elements than you are, and there's no reason for you to necessarily be in that meeting. So again, for example, on Focal Length, we were a narrative-driven game. We had a lot of narrative that had to go into it, and it turned out that by having leads in the narrative meeting, it impeded our narrative team from moving forward with creating the narrative for our game. So the ultimate solution was to remove all leads from that process and just have them pitch us their ideas once they were able to meet. And another example from this from the real world, again, going to Pixar, was when they had their brain trust meetings, Steve Jobs, who owned Pixar, wanted to sit in on those meetings. And Ed Catmull, who's the president of the company, told him that him going to those meetings will fundamentally change what they are, because people will be less candid, they wouldn't feel as comfortable, and they feel like he would have the final say over narrative, even though Steve Jobs doesn't know anything about narrative. So him sitting out of those meetings ultimately ended up helping them make the quality products that they were making. Embrace the reality that your models or ideas may be wrong or incomplete. Again, trusting the people you work with to provide and providing them a clear path, and always engage your team and yourself in anything that may create fear. So if you're afraid of a certain design element or afraid of tackling a topic that the faculty brought up, your idea shouldn't just be like, oh, that's a scary thing to try to deal with. You should have an honest discussion about, well, if we did do this, what would this cost us? What wouldn't this go, like, what would we gain out of it? Is this cost benefit going to work out in our favor? Pay attention to the ever-changing team dynamics. So it's important as a lead, and also just as any member of a team, to mind the internal and external dynamics that may affect your team. So internal and external factors can divert your team from what the ultimate goal is. And again, everybody's an individual on your team, so it's important to remember that they have factors outside of FIEA that may be impacting them. Some of them may have families that they need to attend to. Some of them may just be single and be able to sink all their time in. So don't start comparing like the output of members of the team, because everybody's outside situation of FIEA is very different. Your job is to make sure that they are contributing as much as they can, given what their situations are. So you can't include the team and problems and not just the solutions. So you can't expect the team to just be okay with failure or to engage in candor. If as a lead you can't talk about your own mistakes with the team or your own shortcomings, and you just want to pretend they don't exist, the team is not going to follow you. People are very good at reading through that. People want decisiveness, but they also want honesty about when you screw up. Again, when you go out in the industry, you're not going to be great at everything you do starting off. You're going to have a lot of learning to do, because again, while FIEA is great at getting you the experience you need, it is not going to set you up for every single thing you're going to need to do going into the workforce. So make sure you're being, again, honest with your team about your shortcomings, which will then lead to them being more honest about their own. So last slide on leadership is you can't plan your way out of problems. Again, as a DD, this was like very hard for me to wrap my head around, because your job is to plan everything and want to make sure everything's going according to schedule. But in reality, that's not what's going to happen. So your job really at the end of the day is to not try to prevent failure, but make it okay that you will fail at times. So build that time into the schedule. Make the people on your team understand that it is okay that things that they were trying out did not work out. There's only so much that you can control in the creative environment. And the biggest problem with over-planners is, at the end of the day, all it does is it just takes longer for you to be wrong. And the more time you spend mapping out your approach, the more likely you are to be attached to it and then fight for it and say that your idea or your plan was right in the beginning and that everybody else kind of screwed it up by not doing the work that they should have been doing. Again, candid, be candid. Candor, again, is a huge thing. Your default mode should not be secrecy, especially from your team or from the members of your team. What is needed is thoughtful consideration of the cost that secrecy would gain you versus what the risk is. So there are some things that maybe you do want to keep between the leads, or in the industry, things that like just production should know about that don't need to make their way out to the team, but that should not be the default mode, which is, oh, this big news came in, let's just keep it to ourselves. At Iron Galaxy, they are really good about we have our monthly meetings where we're informed about all the projects that may be coming down the pipeline, and there's just a very open line of communication and a lot of transparency there, which is nice, as opposed to feeling like you're in the dark and you're just a workhorse. It makes you feel valued. Same thing happens on a Capstone team. If you feel like you're in the dark about where the game's headed or what the leads are really talking about behind closed doors in their lead meetings. It could cause some issues on the team. And again, being candid with them just makes them feel like they're partners and that they have ownership in the culture that is happening in the team. Be on the lookout for what you don't know. So that's kind of an interesting one because you don't know what you don't know. But as your position changes at FIEA or in the industry, people are inevitably going to be way more careful about the kinds of things they're going to say around you and the kind of information that you have access to. So once you're in a leadership position, nobody's going to come out and say, well, now that you're a manager, I can't be as candid with you, or I can't tell you about real problems that are going on in the team. But at the end of the day, the people that are kind of on the ground as the content creators are going to know way more about what's going on in the team and what the problems are that you're going to know. So you need to be sure to be on the lookout for those kinds of things because, again, no one's going to come out and just forthright tell you that. And the last note is you don't have to know everything on your team. Making a game is a complex and complicated process, and complex environments are by definition too complicated for any one person to grasp fully. So don't think you have to go into your Capstone updates as the project lead knowing every little facet of your game and everything that's going on and everything that's going wrong. You should have a good idea, but that's why your fellow leads are up here with you, and that's why your teammates are in the audience, that if there's a question that you don't know the answer to, you should at least know who to defer the question to. We had some, like for example, again on Focal Link, we had a civilian tool that was being created because we had a lot of civilians running around in our game that Ricardo, who was this central tech artist, was working on. And there were some times when our project lead was asked questions about the tool, and he would defer it to the art lead, who would then defer it to Ricardo, who would ask about the tool, and there was nothing wrong with that process. You need to understand that it's okay to not know everything, especially when you're in the industry. Games are way bigger than they are here, and there are just so many moving parts that you're going to own maybe a small piece of it, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't have an idea of what the whole picture is. So I'm just going to end on a quote from Ed Catmull about leadership, and really just team culture in general, that a good measure of your success is to look at the people on your team and see how they are working together. Can they rally to solve key problems? If the answer is yes, you are leading well. So I wanted to save some time for questions. So I guess we have till 12, Courtney? Yeah, so we have some time for questions if any of you had any questions about the Capstone process, Iron Galaxy, work in the industry, anything like that. I'll be more than happy to answer those. Yes.
Question. At any point during Focal Length, did you guys make any big design changes that like you had to kind of pivot? And if so, like, how did you present something like that? Because I feel like the way that we have Capstone done, where we're being graded on each status update to kind of greenlight us rather than a presentation at the end, puts the pressure on us to maybe like try to not pivot so much, even though this is kind of our pre-production phase.
Right.
I'm wondering, like, if there was a time that you guys had to make a major pivot in any part of your design, how did you present that, even though you weren't necessarily being graded on what you are?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting the way that you guys are doing Capstone this year and that you're getting graded every week, because it means that every week really matters. You can't just kind of drag your feet along. I honestly think that Focal Link would have been in a bit of trouble if that was the way it was last year, because we didn't really nail down our design or direction to go in. It's like we were making slow and steady progress, but we were not making like leaps and bound progress. Again, that didn't really happen until we instituted that system of having a weekly meeting where we were going over what our build was and as a team coming together to try to figure out what direction to go with the game. I think, again, being candid with the faculty about, yes, here, you are in pre-production, and the faculty understands that. So explaining to them, hey, this is a design feature we are trying out, because the goal is to show progress every week, not necessarily what's going to be in your final game at the end. But if you can show that you made substantial progress on a design feature that is not going to make it into the final game, but that's what you took away from it, then I wouldn't be so concerned about them taking points away from you. Again, I can't speak for the faculty that they won't take points away from you, but I don't think that should, again, that's what I was talking about with fear. I wouldn't let that fear of, oh, I'm not going to show something that's going to be in the final game drive the decision to ultimately rule something out. if you're doing that kind of stuff in like April or May, then yes, you are in.
That's more of a problem.
Yeah, you are in some kind of trouble there. But at this point in time, your goal should be to try anything and everything that makes sense for your game that the team agrees on, and take something away from it. So if you're taking away from it, oh yeah, this is a good feature that we wanted to keep in and we're going to build upon, then that's awesome. And if it's a feature that you realized, hey, it didn't work, but we're going to show it to you, just be prepared to explain to them, like, hey, it didn't work out. We realized why it doesn't work for our game. And they might come back with questions of, well, what if you did this? And because again, that's their job, is to make sure that you're thinking through it before you cut something or add something.
Cool.
So,
As a DD on a game, you said focal length, right?
yep.
Did you find that having physical representations like scrum boards or the gamifying of the Agile system in any way or anything like that to have a significant effect on a team, to show physical progress that they can just see rather than just having an electronic?
Yeah, so what you're going to find is that like pretty much any system of tracking like that is ultimately going to be for your own benefit as a DD. It's like the team can see the progress and stuff, and it's good for keeping everyone accountable. But really, at the end of the day, everybody hates updating those things. Everybody hates going into Jira or Handsoft or whatever and putting their updates. So it's really a tool for you. It doesn't mean that people shouldn't use it, because you are going to use it in the industry. But even at Iron Galaxy, it's like people don't necessarily update those things all the time. For some people, it is very helpful because they can just go in and look at what the tasks are. So again, Ricardo, he's over at Iron Galaxy with us now. He updated his Handsoft here, and he updates his Jira all the time over there. But like our environment guys, like we put all their stuff up in Jira, and then they just go off some Word document that they create that just gets sent back and forth in an email. And then I just go in and update the Jira, so anybody can go look and see what the progress is.
So did you find that having like, this is everything we've completed to the project to date sort of thing displayed on a wall or like that to be motivational to the team?
We didn't do it by date because we just ran out of wall space, essentially, is what happened. So we had our backlog in Handsoft that let you see what everything that was worked on to date. By wall, we did it per week. So a good system that we implemented on Focal Length that I think helped a lot to keep in mind if you're a DD on your team was go around to everybody and ask them the amount of hours that they are willing to put in on your team that week. And you should have an understanding amongst the team of what's like an acceptable amount of hours. So like our project, we thought anything less than 35 hours was like not acceptable, but we were like, no, everybody has classes, it's like 20 hours is gonna be our cutoff. And mind you, this was in like the summer, like kind of towards the throes of when everybody should be putting in the most time. So figuring that out, allowing people to take ownership over, okay, I'm gonna do 25 hours this week. Then let's say your art lead, for example, can say, okay, here's tasks for, like Jared, for example, was one of our conceptors on our team, and Britt was our art lead. So Jared would say, okay, I need 25 hours this week. So Britt would say, here's all these tasks that need to get done, where I can look in the backlog and see what they are. And I would write them down on the note cards, and I would bring them over to Jared and say, can you put your estimates on how long you think these tasks will take? Because at that point, you're giving people ownership over not only how much time that they should be putting in per week, but how much work they're actually signing up for, as opposed to dictating out the work to them. And then if they don't get it done at the end of the week, that's when that physical board is good, because it's understood that everybody that's looking at the physical board says, okay, everybody signed up for this amount of work. So if they don't get it done, it's on them, it's not on anybody else on the team. And that kind of works as a motivational tool for everybody to motivate each other to get their stuff done. And also allows for people to see, hey, I finished my stuff ahead of the 25 hours I estimated this week, and this person looks to be behind. I can take that off their plate and work on it. So it helps to create more of a team-oriented structure in that sense.
How did you feel about like leads workload? Because sometimes like on the Scrum board, leads won't have any tasks, and so it looks silly with like everybody has 25 hours, but in theory, leads have lots of stuff coming up. They're reviewing all the other stuff.
Right. So you may find that leads are just like, yeah, I'm in meetings and whatever, and it's like there is a lot of intangible stuff that people, especially in like the lead production role or the lead design role, although that changes for designers as you go down the pipeline. But in the beginning, it's like you might have a design doc, and people are like, well, that doesn't take that long. But in reality, it does if you're fully thinking through a feature. So
for leads, what we did was we put up on the board, everybody was expected to do some kind of work. So as the DD, I was also doing all the audio design work for our game. And then I was attempting to work with any kind of, before we all made the switch over to UV4, I was doing a lot of the work that would have been transferred over in scale form and stuff into UV3. But what we ended up doing was putting down the work that we were doing that was tangible on the Scrum board with our time estimates for those. And it was understood that leads, for us, we said we should not be putting in any less than 15 hours for that, because then you would have like 5 to 10 hours of intangible time of going around and making sure people are on top of what they said they were going to get done and seeing who needs help or in meetings. But it is important to make sure that you guys have some representation of the work that you're doing, because otherwise you run into this problem where the team goes, what are they really doing other than breathing down my neck? It's like, that's all they're doing. They're sitting on their high horse, and then people get kind of disgruntled. Again, in industry, people are a little bit more understanding of what everybody's actually doing. But here it's good to get in that habit, because perception is really everything. So, any other questions about Capstone or work in the industry? Or
I'll ask you another question about the different work schedules. It's really like unique to Capstone since we're students.
Yeah.
Like some people work really late, some get up really early. Sometimes the programmers are busy Tuesday through Thursday, and the artists are Monday through Wednesday. Like, how did you manage that and like accommodate people's different schedules, or did you not?
yeah, so we did do that. I don't know necessarily how the other teams function, so I can't speak for them. But I do know that on our team, we looked at the schedule and said, here are days when either artists only have one class, or we looked at the days that was least impactful to everybody. And normally it worked out that like programmers and producers would all be busy on the same day, and then artists would be offset on like Tuesday and Thursday. They would be the ones that are busy. So we created what we called our core hours for our team, where it's like, even if you like to come in early or stay late, like whichever side of the spectrum you are, you're expected to be here from X time to X time, and if you have a class in the middle, that's fine. But everybody should have these core hours, and we did that for 2 days out of the week. And then once we started doing our weeklies and realized how much work we really had done to make the game we wanted to do, we also made Sunday a work day for our team. We didn't vilify people who couldn't make it to those work hours or work days, but it was very engaging in the sense that from a DD standpoint, you could see the people that weren't going to come in on the core hours or weren't going to come in, so those might be the people you would assign less important tasks to, because you don't want important tasks going to people who won't be around to discuss those tasks with those around them that are implementing them or working along with them on those systems. And again, that's just a reflection of real life. Like at IGO, we have people, I make it a point, I normally go in at around 9:30, but our core hours are 10 to 6. So it's like, and we have a Chicago studio, which is our main studio, and then our art lead and our animation lead is out in California. So it's like everybody's on different time frames. So we just have our core hours that kind of work. So we know that there are points in the day where everybody is there at the same time, and you can realistically get in touch with them. Yeah. Nick, did you have?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think you were instrumental in making sure that the project stayed on time. If people don't know, we work pretty closely.
Yeah.
Work with all the artists, making sure their tasks are done on time. So this year, we've got art advocates for, there's 6 different teams right now,
Yeah.
right? So I've got 2, Brian's got 2, and Chris has got 2, right? So I'm a big believer that we need somebody on the production side, like what you did for us, to help out with this. I'm not sure if all the teams have implemented this yet or not. And let's just say you know that 2 teams have not set up somebody on the production side to help out with managing the artists.
Yeah.
What would you say to them? And do you think that's a bad idea that they don't have somebody?
Yeah, so, okay, so in the industry, you're going to have producers, like I mainly focus on art stuff. And I think a big part of that is because of, that was like a huge part of my job as DD here, was to wrangle our art team and work closely with Nick, who was our faculty advisor, to make sure that the art was on track and people were getting stuff done. And that's essentially what, as a DD or a producer in industry, you're going to be doing. So you're not just like dealing with production stuff, you're dealing with the whole team. And I think it is absolutely instrumental that, whether it's your DD or someone else, Most of the time it will be your DD, but have them correlating with your faculty advisor on the art side. Programming, in FIEA, you don't have to worry too much about, because programmers by nature are just workhorses, and they'll just like get in the engine and not really, it's like, I don't really care what you're saying, lead producer, go produce somewhere else. And they just don't care. So they don't need much oversight, and Tom does a really good job of making sure their leads are on top of them. But artists, between their portfolio work and their course load and Capstone, it's very easy for them to get lost in the shuffle and for art tasks to slip through the cracks. So you should absolutely have a producer assigned to oversee all the art stuff. Make sure you're stopping in once or twice a day just to make sure how people's tasks on the art side of things are going. And one of the things that we did on our team that was really helpful to making sure art was going was we set up a weekly meeting with Nick. I set up an Excel grading sheet for him. Again, people sign up for their own work. So in this sense, they can't get mad at the team for saying, well, I was given too much work to do this week and that's why I got a bad grade. They're gonna sign up for their own work. So I would write in all the tasks that people signed up for and the amount of hours they said they would sign up for. And then once a week, we would have essentially a weekly meeting like we would do with Tom for gameplay and stuff, but just with Nick and for the artists. And artists would go up and show, this is what we worked on this week, and they would get graded based on the level of completion that it was. And that gave them their weekly art grade. I don't know if you guys are still doing the weekly art grades, but that's how our artists got their weekly art grades. And it kept everybody super motivated, and again, it tells you who the people are that might not deliver on everything they sign up for. So you can do one of two things at that point, which is if they sign up, which again, I'm just going to use Jared as an example because he's in the room. But if Jared says, hey, I'm going to sign up for 35 hours every week, but then realistically he's not putting in 35 hours, if he says, hey, I'm going to do 35 hours, your job at that point should be, why don't we put you down for 20? We'll sign you up for 20 hours worth of tasks, and then if you need more, I can always give you more. Because you don't want them to get bad grades for not getting the work done that they sign up for. But you do need the work to get done. So this is, again, a better way of tracking that from a DD standpoint, but also learning that managerial sense that you're going to want to use in the industry. Like I said, for environments, UI, and all of our character accessory stuff, it's like that's my whole day is talking to our environment lead to find out, and then all our separate environment artists, and same thing with our outsourcers for all our accessory stuff, is just tracking all that stuff. So definitely, absolutely set someone up on your team that is overseeing the artists and communicating closely with the art faculty. Maybe set up a meeting once a week or do one of those weekly reviews for them. But that is a huge thing that will help your team kind of stay on track and understand what you can get done in the amount of time you have. Tigo.
I think the most important question is, who is your favorite KI character?
I can't say because they have not been announced yet. So I cannot say who my favorite character is yet. But I will find you and let you know personally once we announce who that character is.
All right.
Any other questions? Yes.
Pertaining to like your work at Iron Galaxy, how close do you think that process is compared to like what we do? Obviously, like schedules are crazy here because we've got classes on top of Capstone, but how good of an approximation is what we do during Capstone to like your actual industry work?
So what you guys do, or what we all did here, is it feels very condensed compared to the rate at which things are moving in the industry. But it's like that's kind of an unfair assessment in the sense that it's not really condensed, it's just that people are more experienced in the industry. So it doesn't feel like it's as rushed because people know what they're doing, they have a better idea of the estimates and how long things are going to take. The most important thing you're going to take out of this is like the processes and stuff you set in place on the production standpoint are going to be super critical to any job interview you have. Like no one really cares about the particular game you made. You're not going to be asked about that stuff. Like as a designer, you might be asked about how you documented and implemented stuff, but they're not really necessarily going to care about the actual game you made. They're going to be like, oh, that's cool, you made a game, whatever. So on the production side, you're going to want to talk about all the processes you implemented, and a lot of times those are going to mirror what you're going to end up doing in industry anyways. So that, from a production standpoint, that was really good. From a programming standpoint, everything Tom teaches programmers is like golden. So it's like, you can't really say anything about that. And then from an art standpoint, it really just depends on your discipline and how much time and effort you're willing to put in. What I can say for artists is that when I was saying that perception is everything, you never know where your next job's going to come from and who's going to recommend you. I'm at Iron Galaxy in charge now of setting up interviews and tracking all our new hires and finding people to refer to different positions. So it's like, you're going to want to put your best foot forward here. Don't just think like, oh, I got to work on my portfolio so I can get a job. It's like, most likely, your first job is going to be from someone you know in your cohort or previous cohort in the art track, because it is a more difficult track to find a full-time placement out of. A lot of that work is going to be contract work when you first get out there just to get some experience. So I would say that does mirror things very well from each standpoint. Again, Ricardo was our central tech lead, but he was also the art lead on the game that ended up getting cut. And that guy was only here because he took public transportation in. So he came in from like, he was here from like 9 to 5 or 9 to 5:30, and then he would go home because he didn't have a way to get home. But nobody cared because the amount of work that he did in that amount of time, everybody knew that they could rely on him to get stuff done, and that he would always give it his best foot and he wouldn't like half-ass it. So it mirrors things very well, and for the elements that it doesn't mean you can't really learn them or get better about them while you are here. Anything else? All right.
All right, thank you very much. Just as a quick announcement, next month we have 2 speakers. One on February 20th, a alumni, Jackie McCall from Disney Interactive, and then still in negotiations for February 27th, Andrew Brazzi from Riot Games. So he is a developer designer there, and will come and do a workshop here. So please look out for those announcements. And again, I thank you very much for your attendance today. It is very valued, and I hope that these talks are beneficial to you and your designing and developing games over the course of your capstone. Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your day and a great